Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 61 Strange Symbol, the fool that doesn't belong to this era. The mysterious ruler above the gray fog. King of yellow and black who wields good luck. Audrey Hall recited the three descriptions to herself silently. She suddenly felt a tumultuous wave of emotion go through her, preventing her from maintaining her spectator state. As an aficionado of mysticism, she had learned Hermes that was used in rituals, and had tested out the rituals that fellow noble aficionados mentioned in private gatherings, before she was pulled into the gray fog or made formal contact with Beyonder powers. None of those rituals had any effects, but they had given Audrey a basic understanding of the structure of incantations. Thus, she knew clearly what these three incantations described and signified. The descriptions usually described one of the 7 gods that looked over this world. Thus, the Fool's incantation was claiming status equal to the Lady of Crimson, Mother of the Secrets, and the Empress of Disaster and Horror. Is Mr. Fool the unknown, mysterious, powerful, godlike entity that Glaint spoke of, the source of danger that we must avoid in rituals? Audrey quickly recalled the comments made during the strange rituals which she and her friends did not dare attempt back then. She was momentarily at a loss for words. Alger Wilson, who knew and understood much more than Audrey, shivered from the bottom of his heart. If the ritualistic magic which Mr. Fool designed truly points to him to allow him to accept our requests, we would have to be addressing him with him. He is to be addressed in the third person, which is reserved for gods. How lucky, how smart I was to act in concert with him and not do anything foolish. Even when I was testing him, I did not step beyond the boundaries of normalcy. Could he perhaps be an ancient, mysterious, horrifying existence, only that he does not appear before us in his true form and name? The primordial demoness, the hidden sage, or the true creator which many mysterious churches believe in? Alger understood that the fool he was looking at now might not be his true form. He might not even have a gender or be a humanoid creature. Klein propped his forehead up with one hand and tapped on the table with the other hand. He acutely noticed the changes happening to the hanged man and Justice, but he acted as though nothing happened, as if everything was within his expectations. He continued without any care. I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to give me a good dream. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Fingered citron, an herb that belongs to the sun, please bestow your powers to my incantation. He finished describing the incantations that belonged to another type of ritual. After he was done, he smiled. Lady, sir, have you memorized it? Ah, Audrey exhaled. She quickly covered her mouth and recalled seriously. With her improved memory as a spectator, she quickly processed the information and repeated the incantations as a form of confirmation. Alger acted more normally. His pen did not stop for a moment, no matter what he was thinking about. After Klein confirmed that Audrey was correct, he smiled and said, "If this test is successful, then we shall modify the ritual next time to achieve what we want to do. I hope that you will have the time to complete the ritual no later than Wednesday." He intended to come in here again on Thursday night to ascertain if the ritualistic magic was successful. As for why he did not allow the hanged man and Justice to directly request a leave of absence, Klein was worried that he would be unable to discern if the results were from them asking for leave or merely the outcome of an attempt of the ritualistic magic. Was he to pull them into the gathering if that happened? By your will. Audrey and Alger replied respectfully, collecting themselves. According to the hanged man's suggestion last week, we shall have a time for casual conversation after all official issues have been discussed. Who shall begin? Klein gave a hand gesture signaling for someone to start. Audrey sighed and said, Mr. Fool, the suggestion you made regarding the exam selection, and the separation between civil and political matters has received the approval of many members of Parliament. Perhaps it could become a reality. Of course, with the efficiency of this government, the bill will only appear half a year from now at the earliest. She was not worried that the hanged man would track her down using this piece of information. She had intentionally and intermittently dropped hints and guided those proud wives to think that they had conceived the idea. Those ladies had rushed to tell their husbands, their fathers, and their brothers. At that moment, Audrey felt as though she was watching a flock of golden peacocks showcasing their tail feathers. She believed that those women would drill it in themselves that they came up with the idea to claim the glory for themselves. They would soon forget about what Audrey's role in the matter was, fighting among themselves to see who thought of the suggestion first. Using this remarkable way to change the system of a kingdom gave Audrey a weird sense of satisfaction, as if she had found a way for a spectator to influence the plot of a play. "Let's hope so," Alger replied sarcastically. He paused for a few seconds, then glanced at the fool. He deliberated before saying, "In recent decades, the amount of activities of the various secret organizations has seen an upward trend. In fact, there are even new secret organizations appearing, some of them having reached scale with a good number of beyonders. Are you trying to ask me for the reason? I have not even gained access to information about illegal organizations." Klein merely smiled without commenting on the hanged man's news. He changed the subject and said vaguely, "An ancient power is about to wake from its slumber. For example, the power represented by the Antigonus family diary." "Is that so?" Alger muttered softly to himself as though he recalled something. Klein swept his gaze toward the hanged man, then past Justice, and said with a smile, "If there is nothing else to share, then let's end today's gathering here." "By your will." Audrey and Alger stood up together. Klein moved his finger and severed his connection with the dark red stars. He watched as the two figures vanished from the magnificent palace. He stood up and turned toward his own chair, which was also the back of the seat of honor at the bronze table. He looked at its symbol. Radiant stars formed a strange symbol. It was not a symbol that fit anything in Klein's present understanding of mysticism. He observed it closely before identifying the pupilless eye, a symbol representing secrecy. He also saw contorted lines that represented change. Each of the symbols were missing a portion and were overlapped with each other, creating a new symbol. An incomplete secret and an incomplete change. What do we get when we add them together? Klein creased his brows and muttered to himself, unable to come up with an answer. He retracted his gaze and walked along the ancient, magnificent palace. His eyes scanned every corner of the palace. "Back when I casually imagined this place, it was merely a rough concept. I did not describe the shape of the palace, table, or chairs. Where does this design come from? The best choice? The first prototype? Or are they a reflection of reality?" Klein suddenly had a question he neglected previously as he looked at the palace. I have to say that even though I am a keyboard warrior, I am lacking experience in many areas. I am also not observant enough, to the point of only realizing this question now." With such a self-reflection, Klein made a serious effort to examine every corner of the palace, but did not find any other living things or anything strange. Klein did not dare to venture deeper, which seemed to be an illusory land without boundaries. He was afraid that he would end up completely lost. Wow, this place is indeed filled with mysteries. Who knows if there will be any changes to this area when I become more powerful? Klein sighed. He unleashed his spirituality and enveloped himself within, causing him to feel the rapid rush of plummeting. Everything flew past quickly. All kinds of illusions shattered. He tore through the grayish-white fog and saw reality. He saw the table, curtains, and clothes rack in his room. Backlund, Empress Burrow. Audrey saw the oil painting that hung on the wall. She felt the softness the down-feathered pillow under her head provided. She did not stand up immediately. Instead, She seriously recalled what had happened during the gathering, as if she was watching a play she had already watched. Mr. Fool had a certain confidence in his tone when he told us to try the ritual and gave us the descriptions of the mysterious ruler, the king of yellow and black. Confidence. Audrey exhaled as she was analyzing this silently, her body shuddering slightly. Forget it, since I cannot fight it. There's no need to think too much about it. Mr. Fool has always appeared friendly. He should be an entity that has a respect for order. Audrey's mood improved rapidly. She thought about her acting and the weakening backlash of the potion. She hummed a merry tune and got off her bed. She walked toward the door and adjusted her state of mind, taking on her state as a spectator. As she opened the door of the room, she saw a maid walking past. She saw the old calluses on her hands, the marks on her face, and other similar details. She could deduce many things from these observations. At this point, Audrey had a strange feeling. She quickly turned to look at the shaded corner of the balcony. She saw her golden retriever Susie sitting there, silently observing her, just like how she observed the maid. My goddess! Audrey's lips twitched as she sighed. She wanted so much to hide her face. On the Sonya Sea, in the heavily protected captain's quarters, Alger woke up and noticed that nothing had changed around him. It was as if nothing had happened. He sighed and thought to himself, an ancient existence. Klein, who had exited the ritual, pulled open the curtains. He took out his notebook and began writing once again. He recalled the contents of Emperor Roselle's diary, hoping to reinforce the memory through writing and prevent himself from forgetting it in the future. Klein reread the notes several times after he finished writing. Finally, he tore the notes up and incinerated them. I shouldn't forget the most salient points if I do this once a week, but with time and the increasing complexity of my missions, how unfortunate, I do not have better ideas for the time being. I have not learned any cryptography. Klein collected himself and stretched his neck. He planned on heading to the divination club. A seer was defined differently by different people. No one could say that another person's methods were wrong. So Klein, who did not know which kind of seer fit the requirements of the potion, could only correct it as he experimented to ascertain which one was the best fit. 62. The seer's suggestion before Klein left home. He took the time to meticulously clean up his suit and top hat with a small brush and a handkerchief. Then, he washed his white shirt, changing into a similar linen shirt along with the only decent cheap coat he had. He then briskly walked out onto the street. First Melissa's dress, then Benson's suit. Only then can I consider a second suit for myself. Money is never enough. Besides, we need to save money to buy porcelain tableware to receive our guests. Plus, I have to save money to buy a variety of materials related to mysticism. Klein sat on the public carriage and took note of the financial status at home. The more he did the math, the more he shook his head. He reckoned he needed at least a year to let himself, his brother and his sister live as a middle-class family. Of course, that was without taking promotions and pay rises into consideration. The public carriage drove past the streets and stopped opposite to the divination club on House Street. Klein pressed down on his black top hat and hopped off the carriage. He walked along the familiar street and entered the club located on the second floor. He then saw the beautiful brunette, Angelica. There was a hint of swelled redness to her eyes, but she looked extremely relaxed. Klein raised his hand to tap his glabella lightly and carefully examined her. He found out that the grayness deep in Angelica's emotional colors had greatly dispersed. It had been replaced with sunlight-like whiteness. After taking it in, Klein walked over, took off his hat, and smiled. "Madam Angelica, it's a lovely day today, isn't it?" Angelica lifted her head and was briefly shocked. She then beamed and said, "You are just like Mr. Vincent's cat. You don't make any sounds while walking, do you? You managed to tell. I forgot that you are a fortune-teller skilled in face reading." She paused, then she gently bit her lip before bowing. Thank you for your suggestion yesterday. I feel much better. I haven't been this relaxed, happy, and contented in a year." Upon hearing her show her sincere gratitude, Klein was infected with the joy and happiness she had. The corner of his lips lifted, and he said, "It's my pleasure." As he spoke, he could feel his spirituality relax and turn livelier. Is this what the seer potion wants? A seer that can really help the inquirer? Klein pinched his glabella as though he was thinking before secretly tapping twice. It had to be said that he found the action of activating and deactivating his spirit vision in practice insufficiently inconspicuous. However, the problem was that he hadn't thought of a better solution yet. As he had just become a seer recently, his spirituality had yet to reach its limit, and the same was applied to his mastery. Hence, there didn't seem to be many suitable locations for an activation switch for his spiritual vision. The glabella was the best option by far. When I become a true seer after fully digesting the potion, I should be able to design a more inconspicuous activation motion. Klein nodded unnoticeably and walked towards the half-opened meeting room. "Coffee or tea?" Angelica asked hurriedly. "Daisy coffee," Klein answered. He planned on trying out all the drinks the Divination Club had to offer. Then he saw that there were 6 or 7 members present, but not Hannes Vincent, who was almost always was. "Mr. Vincent isn't here." Klein stopped in his tracks and asked a passing question. Angelica was taken aback as she said, "Mr. Vincent doesn't come every day. He accepted an invitation to give a lecture for a divination organization at Enmat Harbor. Are you looking for him?" "Not at all. I was just curious. After all, I've seen him every time I've come here." Klein shook his head with a smile. Meanwhile, he realized that there was a familiar face among the 7 members present. Glacis, who had divined for him before, was present. Glacis was reading some information on the table with his monocle when he suddenly sensed someone looking at him. He lifted his head and cast his gaze. Obvious joy suffused his face as he propped himself up with both hands and stood up. He dashed towards Klein and stopped before him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morty. I have been wondering if you would come today. I heard from Angelica that you are not a doctor but a fortune-teller who is good at face reading." Klein smiled. "That's not the only thing I'm good at, Mr. Glacis. You no longer seem plagued by your ailment." He pinched his forehead and tapped his glabella twice. He noticed that Glacis's health colors had returned to normal. "Yes, I was very regretful for not taking your suggestion back then. Luckily, there is a very amazing apothecary near my place. He gave my wife a magical medicine which brought me away from death," Glacis said emotionally. As a quasi-member of the Nighthawks, Klein asked out of occupational interest, "Very amazing apothecary. Very magical medicine. Magical. How magical? Is it within the range of Beyonders? Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click www.webnovel.com for visiting." He said that it was a kind of folk medicine from Lemberg. "In short, it helped with treating my illness a lot," Glacis answered, without noticing anything abnormal about the question. "Folk medicine apothecary." Klein tapped his glabella as though he was thinking. "What's his name? Where does he stay?" As you know, even a fortune-teller can't guarantee that they would remain in the pink of health all the time. Perhaps I will need to go to purchase some medication from him in the future. Klein learned from his teacher and classmates that the current health system in the world was in a nascent state. There was almost no cure to many diseases, so the magical medications and miraculous apothecaries still controlled the market. There was no harm in knowing more, since it could one day serve useful. Glacis answered honestly. "His name is Lawson Darkwood. He has a tiny store at 18 Vlad Street in East Borough, named Lawson's Folk Herb Store." "Thank you." Klein remembered it and spoke sincerely. Glacis turned around and invited him to sit beside him. At that moment, Angelica came over to serve the coffee she brewed. Compared to Southville coffee, Daisy coffee is more fragrant, but has quite an inferior taste. Klein took a sip and savored it for a moment. Glacis hurriedly deliberated his words when he saw Klein put down his white porcelain cup. "Mr. Morty, can I request a divination from you? I will pay according to a price you set. 8 pence is sufficient. I will not raise the price out of the blue." Klein was hoping that someone would request his divination services. "Do you need a divination room?" "All right. Topaz." Glacis led the way with much more familiarity. After entering the divination room and locking the door, Klein sat behind the long table. He asked in a serious voice, "Mr. Glacis, what would you like the divination to be about?" "I have an investment opportunity, but the amount of money it involves is huge. If it fails, my family and I will take a heavy hit. I wish to know if it will be a successful investment." Glacis volunteered the information. "I have divined using tarot cards previously. A divination after purifying my soul. The result was pretty good. Yes, I did the interpretation myself, but I did not violate the principles of those symbols." Klein thought and asked curiously, "It'd be great if you could describe the entire situation once more and give me your information again. It'd be best if you have the other party's information too. We will do an astrolabe divination." "All right." Glacis organized his words and said, "When Mr. Lanevis examined the Hornicis mountain range, he discovered a gigantic mine rich in high-quality iron ore. He poured in all his savings to buy that land and hired a professional company to survey it. The result was a heartening one. He lacks funds needed for subsequent developments, so he formed a steelworks company and intends to apply for a loan from the bank using the project. At the same time, he will also issue a corresponding number of shares to raise its initial capital. The plan is still in its preparatory stage and promises fat returns." Klein, who had been reading the newspaper recently and also happened to be a history expert, knew that there were shares in this world. He also knew that the concept of shares was derived from Emperor Roselle. Yeah, him again. During the colonization of the southern continent, he had set up the West Balam Company and solved the nation's fiduciary matters successfully by raising funds from the public through the issue of shares. As such, he had the first mover's advantage from colonization. Because the returns were great, this development continued on. For example, there were railway shares, mining shares, steam development shares, and so on and so forth. There were some that succeeded and there were some that failed. Hence, it catalyzed the formation of organizations like the Backland Stock Exchange. Besides that, the Emperor Roselle had created national bonds, unit trusts, and other financial products. The former had become the most stable form investment, with a return of 4 to 6% interest. Klein remembered that Benson had once said that if he could inherit £3,000, there was no need to work hard any further. The stable annual interest of about 5% would result in an annual fixed income return of £150, roughly equivalent to Klein's annual income at present. This is known as rentier capitalism. Klein sighed and asked carefully, "Are you sure there's nothing wrong about this? Is Lanevis trustworthy?" "I've seen his property papers and the inspection report. There is the Civilhouse County government's stamp and an endorsement of a professional company. Plus, inside Mr. Lanevis's office is a group photo of him with Sir Deweyville and the mayor." Glacis nodded in reply. "Group photo. That doesn't mean anything." Klein, who was born in an era of information explosion, had seen too many similar incidents. He didn't buy the story because of that. However, it didn't matter if he believed it or not. He could only pick up a pen and draw a corresponding astrolabe according to the crucial time and information that Glacis had provided him with. After a long while, Klein pointed to the astrolabe and said, "You should be able to tell that this will be a very unsuccessful endeavor. Below the flourishing surface is a cliff, a chasm. My divination suggestions going around it to avoid it." Glacis fell into silence, his mouth turning agape a few times before he closed it. A few minutes later, he said with a rueful smile, "I'll consider it carefully when I'm back." Upon hearing this answer, Klein could only shake his head with a silent sigh. He realized the helplessness of a seer. A seer could only give suggestions and not make the decision for others. Just as the two left the topaz room, Angelica walked over and said, "Mr. Morty, someone wishes for your divination." When she said that, she added with a whisper, "He did not ask for my recommendations, nor did he view the album. Has my reputation spread?" Klein turned towards the reception hall in puzzlement. 63 Dream Interpretation. Klein proceeded a few steps forward and saw the client. He was dressed in a formal black suit and a half-top hat. He held a gold-inlaid wooden cane and his short blonde hair flared from the sides. His nose was aquiline like a hawk's beak. Anna's fiancé, the Joyce Mayer that went through a terrifying ordeal. Klein, who had seen him in his dream divination, immediately greeted with a smile, "Good afternoon, Mr. Mayer." "Good afternoon, Mr. Morty." Joyce took off his hat and bowed in greeting. "Thank you for the advice you gave Anna. She cannot stop praising how miraculous you are." Klein chortled and said, "I did not change a thing. You should be thanking yourself. Without your determination and your hope for a better tomorrow, you wouldn't have been able to overcome such an ordeal." After the exchange of pleasantries, Klein could not help but lampoon inwardly. Does this count as mutual professional bootlicking? In all honesty, I still find my coming back alive a dream. I still cannot believe that I survived wave after wave of terrifying ordeals. Joyce shook his head wistfully. Without waiting for Klein's reply, he asked curiously, "You knew who I was the moment you saw me. Was that because of my unique nose or because you divined that I would visit you?" "I had your detailed information. That is enough for a seer," Klein answered vaguely, behaving like how a charlatan would. Joyce was indeed stunned. More than 10 seconds later, he squeezed a smile. "Mr. Morty, I wish to request a divination from you." The moment he finished his sentence, he suddenly realized something. Mr. Klein Morty had addressed himself as a seer, not a fortune-teller. A seer. "All right, let us head to Topaz." Klein gestured. At that moment, he felt as though he should have worn a long black robe. He tried to keep his words to a minimum to accentuate the mystique of a seer. Joyce Mayer locked the door behind him after entering the divination room. While he observed his surroundings, Klein seized the opportunity to tap his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. Joyce sat down and set his cane down beside him. He pulled on his black bow tie and said hoarsely, "Mr. Morty, I wish for you to interpret my dream." Dream interpretation. Klein acted as though it was within his expectations, but was merely asking for confirmation. He saw that the colors representing Joyce's health were dull, but none of them signified an impending illness. The colors symbolizing his emotions were predominantly blue, and its darkness showed that he was obviously high-strung. Joyce nodded seriously. "I have had the same horrific dream every night ever since the Alfalfa arrived at Enmat Harbor. I know that this could be associated with the trauma of the ordeal, and that I should go see a psychiatrist, but I suspect that this is no ordinary dream. A normal dream would definitely have some details that are different even if they recur every night, but this dream is, at the very least, constant in the parts which I can recall. To a seer, these kinds of dreams are seen as revelations given by the divine," Klein said, half consoling and half explaining. "Can you describe the dream to me?" Joyce clenched his fists and upped to his. He thought deep for a moment before saying, "I dreamed that I was falling from the Alfalfa into the ocean. The ocean was dark red, as if it was filled with rotting blood. As I fell, I was grabbed by a person on the boat. I could not identify him, but I know that he was very strong. And I was also holding onto a person in an attempt to save him from falling into the sea. I know that person. He was a passenger of the Alfalfa, Yauni's Kim. Because of his weight and his struggling, I could not bear the weight and could only release my hands and watch him get devoured by the sea of blood. At that moment the person above me also released his hand. I flailed my arms, hoping to grab onto something, but there was nothing. I could only plummet rapidly. Then I wake up in horror, sweat covering my back and forehead. Klein held his forehead and gently rapped it as though he was thinking. He then organized his words and said, "Mr. Mayor, nightmares, similar nightmares and repeated nightmares, these are all psychological problems and have a corresponding source. The same nightmare recurring time and time again is a reminder from your spirituality. It is also a revelation given to you by the divine." Upon seeing Joyce appearing confused, he elaborated, "Do not have any doubt. An ordinary person's spirituality is also capable of giving reminders. I do not know what exactly happened on the alfalfa, but I can see that it was a tragedy of blood and steel. It has left a deep trauma in you." Seeing Joyce nod slightly, Klein continued, "You must have been very horrified, very fearful on the ship. It is easy for a person to lose their observational skills when overwhelmed by such intense emotions, thus missing signs that they should not have been missed. This does not mean that you have not seen those signs, but you have disregarded them, you understand. Disregarded. In your subconscious, in your spirituality, the details that you have missed are present all the same. If the thing that the detail is pointing toward is important enough, then your spirituality will remind you in the form of a dream. Previously, I had similar case of disregarding a feeling, only to later realize that the diary was with Ray Bieber. But I was more sensitive and had stronger spirituality. I was also more knowledgeable about mysticism, and thus could make a deduction more quickly." Klein paused for a few seconds and looked into Joyce Mayer's eyes. "Did Mr. Yauni's Kim, who you let fall into the sea of blood, requested you of something on the boat, but was ultimately unable to escape his fate?" Joyce fidgeted his body unnaturally. He opened his mouth several times before answering, "Yes, but I do not pity him. Perhaps a few days or a week from now, you will see in the newspapers how cruel and evil he was. He raped and murdered at least 3 ladies and tossed a baby into the raging sea. He also led a bunch of savages who had lost their rationality and brutally massacred the passengers and crew of the boat. He was scheming, strong, and evil. I did not dare, nor could I stop him. I would only have forfeited my life." "I am not doubting what you did," Klein said, making clear his stand. Then he explained, "But your dream is telling me that you are feeling regret and sorry. You believe that you should not have released your hand back then. Since you believe that killing him was an act of justice, then why are you feeling regret and sorry for it, so much so that you have recurring dreams about you releasing your hand?" "I don't know either." Joyce shook his head, confused. Klein crossed his hands and placed it under his chin. He attempted to analyze the situation. "Incorporating what I just described, it seems you have missed certain details. For instance, anything that Yauni's Kim mentioned, his contents of his plea, the way he presented himself, etc. I cannot recall the incident for you, so please think about it carefully. There's nothing. All he could say back then was 'Spare me, I surrender,'" Joyce muttered in puzzlement. Klein did not know exactly what happened, so he could only guide him based on what he understood from the dream. "Perhaps you felt that Yauni's Kim was more useful alive, that he could prove something or to explain something." Joyce knitted his brows. It was a while before he said, "Perhaps. I still find the conflict that arose on the alfalfa happened too suddenly and turned intense too quickly. It was as if the passive evil in everyone's heart just erupted uncontrollably. It was too abnormal, very abnormal. Perhaps I wish to interrogate Yauni's Kim why he acted as though he was possessed by the devil in the first place." Klein suddenly had a stroke of inspiration after hearing Joyce's dreamy description. He spoke mysteriously with a tone unique to charlatans. No, that's not the only reason. What? Joyce seemed shocked. Klein crossed his hands and held his chin up. He stared straight into Joyce's eyes and said with a slow, yet forceful tone, "Not only did you find the matter abnormal, but you also saw some things that you disregarded. And putting together these things that you disregarded results in a terrifying conclusion. Your spirituality is telling you that there is someone who should be under the highest suspicion. And that person is the one who had grabbed you but ultimately released his hand in the dream. You do not suspect him subconsciously, and thus you are unable to identify him. He is your partner. He once had control over your fate, or maybe even saved you before." Joyce leaned back suddenly, slamming into the back of the chair with a dull thud. His forehead slowly became laced with sweat, his eyes filled with confusion. I see it." Joyce suddenly stood up noisily, causing his chair to wobble and nearly fall. "Mr. Triss." He used all the energy in him to utter the name. He was a friendly and bashful little boy with a round face. He was the hero that saved the survivors. Klein did not interrupt Joyce's thoughts. He leaned back slightly and waited. Joyce's expression changed several times, finally returning to normal, a normal that had a little paleness. He revealed a rueful smile. "I understand now. Thank you for interpreting my dream. Perhaps it is time for me to make a trip to the police station." He took out his leather wallet and fished out a one-solely note. "I do not think that money can fully represent your worth, and I can only give you the price you asked for. This is for you." Joyce pushed the note toward Klein. "I wouldn't have minded if you gave me 10 pounds. One solely, you sure are like your fiancée." Klein kept up his mysterious vibe as a charlatan and said nothing, smiling as he pressed on the note. Joyce took a deep breath, wore his hat, and turned to walk toward the door. As he was unlocking the door, he suddenly turned back and said with sincerity, "Thank you, Master Morty." "Master," Klein laughed to himself. He watched as Joyce left the divination room and said silently to himself, "Whatever happened on the Alfalfa seems extraordinary. If only the captain was here. He would be able to understand everything that happened in Joyce Mayer's dreams." Tuesday at dawn. Backlund, Empress Burrow. Audrey, who woke up earlier, beckoned her golden retriever Susie over. She said with a serious tone, "Susie, you are also a Beyonder now. We are the same kind, you know. What I mean is that we have to help each other. Guard the door later and don't let anyone disturb me. I have to conduct a ritual." Susie looked at her mistress and shook her tail in exasperation. 64 instigator. After instructing her golden retriever Susie, Audrey paced around, seemingly worried. She too was uncertain if the ritualistic magic would result in anything odd. "Let's do this." Her eyes turned calm as she used her state as a bystander to view the imagined process. Soon, she came to a new arrangement. Audrey unlocked the door to her bedroom and said to Susie, "Susie, sit here. If Annie and the rest try to barge their way in, immediately go to the bathroom to inform me." In order to prevent any accidents, her personal maidservant had the key to unlock her door. Susie looked at her enigmatically and wagged her tail thrice. "Very good. I will let you choose anything you want for lunch today." Audrey pumped her fist gently. After exhorting Susie, she entered the bathroom. The square bathtub was 3 to 4 meters on each side. There was clear water rippling gently in it with steam emitting from it. It was quite a dreamy sight. Audrey tidied up a rectangular table with many bottles placed on it. Then she went back out and moved candles, sacrificial items, and a white robe over. Immediately after that, she closed the bathroom door. With everything done, Audrey heaved a sigh of relief and picked up a translucent light blue bottle beside the 4 candles. The cylindrical bottle shimmered dreamily under the light. In it was the essence oil she had distilled from a mixture yesterday. As an aficionado of mysticism, she had no lack of research regarding such items. She had many different kinds of pure dew, flower essence, perfume, essential oils, and incense that she brewed herself at home. As such, she had already finished the initial preparations according to the fool's instructions. Moon flowers, gold mint, slumber flowers, fingered citron, and rock rose. What an odd concoction, Audrey mumbled softly. Oh, one has to cleanse one's body and calm their mind before engaging in ritualistic magic. This is a form of reverence to the divine, to the target. As she went through the entire process in her head, she placed the ritual's essential oil beside her bathtub. She reached out and began disrobing what she wore at home. Pieces of her silk clothing fell into the laundry basket one after another. Audrey coiled up her hair into a bun and tested the water's temperature with her hand. Then she carefully stepped into the bathtub, allowing her body to slowly sink into the water's warm embrace. Phew! She exhaled comfortably, finding herself warm all over. She felt abnormally relaxed. I don't even want to move a single finger. Audrey forcefully pumped herself out as she grabbed the translucent light blue bottle beside her and dripped a few drops into the water. A waft of fragrance dispersed, filling the silence with a refreshing smell. Audrey breathed in a few times and nodded in satisfaction. Not bad, it smells really good. How relaxing, how comfortable. I don't want to move at all. All I wish is to lie here in silence. Silence in silence. Silence. After losing her sense of time, Audrey suddenly heard barking. She opened her eyes in shock, looking to her sides in a daze. She had no idea when Susie had opened the door and entered. She was squatting outside the bathtub, looking at her with an exasperated look. As she rubbed the corners of her eyes, Audrey felt that the water had cooled down quite significantly. I fell asleep, she subconsciously asked herself. Susie looked at her without barking or wagging her tail. Ha ha, the effects of that bottle of ritual essential oil sure is great. Yeah, really great. Audrey chuckled dryly as she explained with a cheerful tone. She stood up, retrieved a towel, and as she wrapped and wiped her body, said to the golden retriever beside her, Susie, continue keeping watch. Do not let Annie and the rest enter. Only when the golden retriever left did she secretly stick out her tongue. She threw her towel aside and wore a clean white robe. After closing the door to the bathroom, Audrey recalled the ritual she had memorized. She picked up 4 candles and placed them on the 4 corners of the table. A loaf of white bread at the top left corner, a bowl of Potter noodles at the top right corner. Smells great, but it's a little cold. No, it's not time to think of this. Paella at the bottom left corner and daisy pie at the bottom right. Audrey set up the altar according to the fool's description seriously, shaking her head twice during the process. After she was done with the preparation, she left her 4 candles lit. She picked up a silver knife and stabbed it into a pile of coarse salt. After narrating the sacred incantation in Hermes, Audrey raised the knife with beautiful patterns and placed it into a cup filled with clear water. After focusing her mind, she pulled out the silver sacred blade, cogitating her spirituality to spew out and spread from her blade. Invisible energy spewed out as Audrey held the knife and circled the altar once. When she felt that a spirituality wall was fully erected around her, she expelled all the uncleanliness and distractions outside. Maintaining her spectator state, she prevented her excitement and joy from affecting the ritual. She put down the silver knife and picked up the tiny light blue crystalline bottle and dripped a drop on each candle. Sizzle! A faint fragrance emanated as Audrey's body, heart, and soul seemed to attain tranquility. She drew a breath as she lowered her head in reverence and began chanting the incantation in Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to give me a good dream. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Fingered citron, an herb that belongs to the sun, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Right after Audrey chanted the incantation and hoped to cogitate the contents of her plea, She felt there was a stir within the spirituality wall. She saw a dark red star swirling on the back of her hand. Her heart leaped as she hurriedly closed her eyes and calmed her heart to plead sincerely. When everything was over, she surveyed her surroundings wondrously, but did not find anything odd. "Is that all?" Audrey knitted her eyebrows slightly as she whispered, "The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. The fool that doesn't belong to this era." In the Blue Avenger's captain cabin, Alger Wilson in his windstorm robe was silently reciting the 3 lines of description he had heard in the afternoon. He seemed to be attempting to find clues of the person's identity through it. He shook his head and stood up in a clearly vexed manner, but ultimately did not do anything. Alger was not at ease inside the Blue Avenger, an ancient ship that was a relic from the Tudor dynasty. Although he was already in control of the ship, he had a gut feeling that there were still many hidden secrets, just like the Blood Emperor. Therefore, he planned on using the ship to test the fool's powers, but did not wish to attempt the unknown ritualistic magic on the ship. Alger ruminated for a few minutes before leaving the captain's cabin and went on deck. He said to the few sailors, "We will be reaching the Rörsted archipelago soon. We will be anchoring there for a day." The sailors immediately cheered as they shouted in unison, "Thank you, Your Grace." As the ghost ship did not need sailors, there were very few sailors on board. There was no need to worry about their supplies, being able to enjoy fresh food and clean water. However, day after day of voyaging at sea, and the nearly unending vistas exhausted them both physically and mentally. It felt like they were always repressed and tolerating something until they lost control. As for the Rörsted archipelago, it was a famous colony on the Sanya Sea. Their business was booming, and they had all kinds of industries. "I simply can't wait." A crew member gyrated his hips and sniggered a meaningful laugh that all men would understand. On the public carriage toward Zoutelen Street, Klein, who was reading the newspapers leisurely, suddenly jolted. He seemed to hear an ethereal voice calling out to him. Shapeless murmurs resounded in his mind as his forehead throbbed uncontrollably. The contents of the calling that could not be heard left as fast as it came. In just 10 seconds, it was gone. Klein pinched his forehead and resisted the throbbing pain deep in his brain. Is this the murmurings of unknown existences that old Neil mentioned? A result of having enhanced spiritual perception? Thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he suddenly saw 4 black dots appear on the back of his right hand. They were like tiny, inconspicuous moles. The 4 black dots that stemmed from the luck enhancement ritual quickly sank, dimmed, and vanished. Klein looked at it in surprise and had an additional guess about what had just happened. Justice, or the hanged man, has attempted the ritualistic magic I gave them. Was my train of thought right? Those 3 descriptions have precisely pointed towards me through the mysterious space above the gray fog, but I'm far from powerful enough. I can't hear the contents of their requests. I wonder if the information is stored above the gray fog. Yes, I should confirm it by entering tonight. Klein felt a little perturbed and agitated. He quickly raised his newspaper and hid his face, preventing anyone from seeing the changes to his expression. Soon he arrived at Zoutelen Street and entered the Blackthorn Security Company. Before he could greet Rosen, Klein saw Captain Dunsmith walk out. He held a piece of paper with a portrait on it. "Take a look at this internal warrant of arrest. A very cruel and vicious beyonder has entered Tingen." Dressed in his black windbreaker, the hatless Dun swept his gaze over and handed the piece of paper in passing. Klein received it, and the first thing that entered his vision was a portrait sketch. The sketch was of boy with a round face. He looked amiable with a tiny hint of bashfulness and was fairly young, probably about 18 or 19 years old. Triss, a suspected beyonder. The initial estimate is that he's a Sequence 8 instigator, and we are not eliminating the possibility that the Theosophy Order is behind it, the culprit behind the massacre of the Alfalfa. According to a witness testimony, he came to Tingen after leaving Enmat Harbor. His current whereabouts are unknown. Tris. Alfalfa. It's actually a crime committed by a Beyonder. Klein suddenly recalled the dream interpretation from yesterday afternoon and Joyce Mayer's description. He immediately said, "Captain, I know one of the witnesses. He might very well be an important witness." "I know, Joyce Mayer. My help was requested by the machinery hive mind last night. I saw you in Joyce's dream. Many details have led to the confirmation that the Alfalfa tragedy was a result of Tris." Dunn's gray eyes looked unperturbed as he chuckled. "How uninteresting. Captain, thankfully it was my rest day yesterday and not me acting as seer during working hours," Klein lampooned. He barely missed the horror of being caught skiving by his direct superior. He asked instead, which sequence pathway is instigator? What kind of organization is the Theosophy order? Was instigating others to kill each other the method Tris used to eliminate the side effects of the potion, or was it a requirement needed to advance? Dunn thought for a few seconds and said, "Coincidentally, it's about time for you to learn the relevant information regarding Beyonders and the mysterious organizations. You shouldn't be ordered by old Neil to keep reading the historical documents all the time. Captain, wasn't the reason for recruiting me to be your history expert?" Klein did not dare point out the problem as he nodded seriously. "All right. 65 Beyonder information with a document signed by Dunn." Klein went underground and turned into the armory. "Dunn is right. It's time you understand the different Beyonders and the various secret organizations." Dressed in a black classic robe, old Neil read the note without finding it surprising. Instead, he supported the captain's decision. He then added immediately with a smile, "After all, you will be heading to the underground market with me tomorrow night." "Tomorrow night?" Klein did not conceal his pleasant surprise as he asked to confirm. Old Neil nodded and said with a sigh, "I'm a person who can't sleep when in debt. I always wish to settle them as soon as I can." "You did not seem to act so previously. You left it to the last moment before using ritualistic magic to resolve the problem." "So I'm not the only one suffering from procrastination. Wait, is there a need to euphemize afraid to spend away the money to repay a loan?" Klein did not expose old Neil and instead urged, "Mr. Neil, I'll be troubling you to retrieve the corresponding information from Channy's Gate." There were mostly archaeological and historical documents in the armory. There were documents involving Beyonders and mysterious organizations, but few in number. Furthermore, they were mostly basic knowledge. Old Neil slowly took a sip from his hand-ground coffee and smacked his lips. He then walked out the armory with the signed and stamped document. Klein watched the place on his behalf. About 10 minutes later, old Neil returned with a huge stack of documents. "They can only be read in here. They are not to be taken out," he warned as he placed the information on the desk. "All right." Klein gave a firm nod. He extended his hands and quickly flipped through the pages and did a general read-through. Very detailed, as expected of the Nighthawk's internal documents, as expected of a church with 4,000 years history or even more. Klein sighed inwardly as he glanced through the documents. Not only did the documents introduce the various secret organizations, it also listed down many of the sequence pathways. It was very complete. Some of them only wrote the potion name of the corresponding sequence, while others only described the Beyonder abilities of the corresponding sequence. Some were completely missing and left blank. While holding back his excitement, Klein found the sequence pathway that led from Seer. He ruffled through the pages and soon found a familiar word. Then, his delighted expression quickly froze because there was no corresponding potion name sequences 7 and 8 after Seer. Thankfully, the abilities of the two following sequences are present. Klein silently exhaled as he calmed his mind and read the description seriously. Sequence 8, potion name unknown. The corresponding Beyonder is good at fighting with artifice and very crafty. Good at fighting with artifice. This is the next advancement of Seer. Why does it feel odd? I'm not a hunter. Am I going to become a melee mage? What does crafty mean? My intelligence is enhanced, making me good at fooling the enemy. Klein was stunned. He even suspected that the Nighthawk's information was wrong. There were corresponding case studies appended, but he could not find a reasonable explanation despite reading it repeatedly. He cast his gaze lower as the description of Sequence 7 entered his eyes. Potion name unknown. The corresponding Beyonder is good at many spells that can be quickly cast. Fuses one's body's skill and supernatural powers as one. That's more like it. This is what an advancement of a seer should sound like. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. After seeing the case studies of Sequence 7, he cast his eyes to the overall description of the pathway. This sequence pathway was first established by the Solomon Empire's Zaratul family. During the conflicts of the Fourth Epoch, the family was not fully destroyed. The family's name was occasionally heard in the history of the Fifth Epoch. It is suspected to be connected to the ancient organization, the Secret Order. Zaratul. Upon seeing this name, Klein's eyes constricted. He had just seen this name appear in the remnant diary pages of Emperor Roselle yesterday afternoon. Roselle's acting came from a reminder by the mysterious figure known as Zaratul. Because of that mysterious Zaratul, Emperor Roselle regretted not choosing Seer. Therefore, I was indirectly influenced, turning me into a seer. It makes acting return to the embrace of the seer. It feels like it was all predestined. Klein knitted his brows and felt that things were somewhat different. Just from the logical chain, he did not feel that there was anything wrong in any aspect. However, in the domain of mysticism, predestiny often manifested things and involved new problems. In addition, transmigration is quite a baffling matter. It's just confusing. And the guy I've possessed tried to commit suicide because of the lost notebook of the Secret Order. Klein thought for quite a while and had many guesses, but lacked the information needed to prove them. Phew. After repeatedly reading the information, he finally suppressed his ideas and read the other records. He first found the sailor sequence and discovered that it indeed belonged to the Lord of Storms. For an old opponent that they haven't faced for perhaps more than 2,000 to 3,000 years, the Nighthawk's internal records were rather detailed. Sequence 8, Folk of Rage, ancient name Guardian of the Windstorm. The corresponding Beyonder can release several strikes that exceed ordinary thresholds when enraged. Their strength and speed are greatly enhanced. Facing them is like facing a storm. Sequence 7, Seafarer, ancient name Windstorm Priest. The corresponding Beyonder is also a scholar of astronomy and geography. They have an intuitive grasp of magnetic fields, ocean currents, wind direction, and clouds. A boat with a seafarer will never get lost at sea. They are even more beloved by the oceans and gain enhancements in every aspect at sea. They are friends of water. They can act freely underwater for more than half an hour. They can cast a limited number of water-related spells. Some are a result of their own capabilities, and some are a bestowment from the Lord of Storms, for example. A Sequence 7 seafarer is very powerful. Klein nodded while in deep thought. He suspected that the Hanged Man was a guardian of the windstorm, if not a seafarer. From how he has recently advanced, it was more likely he was the latter. This also indicated in a way that the Hanged Man was either a member of the mandated Punisher or a pirate who had been secretly absorbed by the Church of the Lord of Storms. Impressive. Impressive. Klein flipped back a few pages and found the advancement of Spectator. He discovered that the description was identical to what the Hanged Man had said. Sequence 9 Spectator was like a seer. They lacked direct combat means and could only observe a target to obtain information, gleaning the true thoughts of the target. By doing so, They could provide subtle influences and guidance to cause situations to develop in a way they wish. Sequence 8 telepathist was the advancement of spectator. Their observation was not only limited to superficial details, but deeper into one's aura, ether body, or other mysterious domains. The combination of the two allowed a telepathist to precisely understand a person's thoughts as though they could read their minds. In front of them, it was difficult to have any secrets. Sequence 7 psychiatrist, which was also known as psyche-analyst, had further enhancements above the Sequence 8 foundations. They could begin directly influencing a target. For instance, they could treat a target's maniacal problems or alternatively, cause them to turn maniacal and lose their reason. A beyonder that is very difficult to be noticed. After reading the description, Klein made a reasoned judgment. After understanding the relevant information concerning the gathering members, he flipped to the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. This was because Emperor Roselle had chosen their savant sequence. Sequence 9, savant. The corresponding beyonder believes that knowledge is power. They have a rough understanding of the supernatural, but are more knowledgeable about aqua regia, nitroglycerin, and complicated bolts and gears. They seem to know everything. It is no wonder that the Emperor Roselle said that this potion suited him perfectly, allowing for him to press his advantage to the fullest. Klein understood completely as he shifted his eyes down. After several case studies, the corresponding Sequence 8 finally appeared in Klein's vision. Archaeologist. They possess a good deal of knowledge about history and outdoor survival, as well as forbidden knowledge about ruins. They have a strong enough body and ability to face everything. Sequence 7, appraiser. They can intuitively understand the powers and problems of most extraordinary items and can use them while keeping danger at its lowest. As Klein's security clearance was insufficient, he only had access to sequence pathways up to 7. It left him a little frustrated, but there was no other way around it. He only wished that Backlund would quickly send over the sealed artifact 2049 to determine if Ray Bieber was a descendant of the Antigonus family. That way, he would have a chance of becoming a formal member and obtain a higher security clearance. Collecting himself, Klein read the material seriously from cover to cover. He knew that the sequences following Corpse Collector were Gravedigger and Spirit Medium. He also knew that there was no information about the Sequence 8 of the Mystery Prior Path. Not only was there no name for the potion, but even the description had been left blank. There was a name for Sequence 7 of that path, Warlock. Sounds impressive. Klein slowly flipped the page and saw Apprentice and Marauder, which Emperor Roselle had lingering thoughts for. Their records only reached Sequence 8 and nothing more. Sequence 9, Apprentice. Their abilities are rather strange. It can only be confirmed that this is the originating pathway of a mage. They are rarely trapped and very difficult to be stopped. They often are able to escape and pass through obstacles every time. Sequence 8, Trickmaster. They wield all kinds of strange but impotent spells. Sequence 9, Marauder. Difficult to separate these beyonders from ordinary bandits or thieves. Perhaps the means available to them are more impressive, but their goal of stealing riches is not for enjoyment or survival. It's more like answering a calling. Sequence 8, Swindler. We have also discovered traces of beyonders in fraud investigations. They gain enjoyment from swindling. Gain enjoyment from swindling. This is acting in a different form, isn't it? If I had the choice, I might have chosen Apprentice. Klein silently said to himself. Suddenly, he discovered the corresponding sequence potion of the culprit of the Alfalfa tragedy, Tris Instigator. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. 66 Demoness Sec, Sequence 8, Instigator. They are adept at triggering the evil desires deep in people's hearts, causing contradictions and inciting conflict, thus resulting in bloody massacres. The description isn't detailed enough. From the looks of it, the Nighthawks do not understand the capabilities of this potion well enough. But it does match the characteristics of the Alfalfa tragedy. Klein cast his gaze up and read the corresponding Sequence 9 for Instigator. Sequence 9, Assassin, can transform their bodies in a short period of time and become light as a feather. They can also utilize vision equal to that of an eagle. Every assassin is adept at hiding in the shadows. They have dexterous steps and have the ability to release all their strength in one blow. After reading the description, Klein was left completely confused. Assassin. The advancement from assassin is instigator. This advancement is just as odd as how a seer advances to a class that is good at fighting with artifice. Some sequence pathways advance in a very ordinary fashion, such as spectator. Yet there are sequence pathways that seem to violate intuition and logic. Well, that might not be completely true. Perhaps I just haven't discovered some of the hidden common points. For instance, assassins and instigators can both bring catastrophe to others. But I can't figure out the advancement of Seer. Hey, could it be of the Gandalf one lineage? After adding some supportive magic, the other attribute points are dumped into strength and techniques. As Klein lampooned in a speechless manner, he silently shook his head. He flipped to the section about the secret organization, the Theosophy Order that involved instigators. Theosophy Order, a secret organization that appeared in the Fifth Epoch, which is the early era of the current epoch. They believe that the mind is fundamental to a person, while the physical flesh is a cage that restrains the mind. The reason why humans do evil is a result of the physical body's influence. One has to use their spirituality to obtain knowledge, allowing the mind to gradually extricate from the body. Then, through the trials of the stars, they will eventually be separated from the material world, returning to the purest and truest self, obtaining eternal redemption. Therefore, many extremist members of the Theosophy Order will make destroying the bodies of others their goal, which has led to many bloody massacres. It is obvious that they possess two sequence pathways. The first is the more common apprentice and trickmaster potions among their members. The other sequence comprised of assassin and instigator rarely appear. There is currently no evidence that indicates that the Theosophy Order possesses sequence 7 or higher potions. It is unknown how the Theosophy Order established itself. Their possible origins can only be analyzed using the two sequence pathways. Firstly, the apprentice and trickmaster sequences easily remind people of the Abraham family of the Trickmaster dynasty in the Fourth Epoch. The Tamara family, tied to the Abraham family through marriage for extended periods of time, cannot be eliminated as well. Secondly, assassin and instigator point towards the demoness sect. The Abraham, Tamara, Antigonus, and Zaratul families, the Solomon Empire's Dark Emperor, the Tudor dynasty's Blood Emperor, the Trunsost Empire, and the Jacob and Ammon families that the Hanged Man had mentioned. There are really lots of secrets buried in the history of the Fourth Epoch. There might be a lot of facts, too. Klein was astounded from what he read. He had a deep appreciation for how the history of the Fourth Epoch was clouded in fog. The outline he could see through the fog left him shuddering involuntarily. It was as though he could imagine a thriving era of beyonders, an epic with blood and strangeness in a concerted dance, or horror and distortion in a symphony. Klein drew in a silent gasp and flipped through the book, but did not discover any corresponding descriptions of the demoness sect. He looked up and saw old Neil wrestling with some filter paper with his hand-ground coffee. He asked sincerely, "Mr. Neil, what organization is the demoness sect? I can't find any introduction about them in the documents." Old Neil was in no hurry to respond. After wrestling with his coffee, he chuckled and said, "Your security clearance isn't high enough. Even with Dunn's permission, you would not be able to read the relevant information. It can also be said that a lot of the information is only available in the Holy Cathedral, and isn't stored behind Tinjin City's Channy's Gate. Perhaps wait till the day you become a captain of the Nighthawks. You would be sent to the Holy Cathedral for training and would then be able to access them. I do not understand much about the Demoness sect. All I know is that they worship the primordial Demoness. They believe that this secret existence is the true inheritor of the Creator. She was born out of the chaos and was the earliest to be born from the Creator's body. She is also the ultimate ender that ends everything. Their sequence pathways are related to this because to obtain the favor of the primordial Demoness and to approach this secret existence, the upper echelons are all female. This is also why they are called the Demoness sect. Anything else is not something a formal member like me will know. I've heard that the Demonesses make it their mission to spread catastrophes. This does match the hidden commonality of assassin and instigator. But this Mr. Triss's future seems bleak. The subsequent potions seem to be more suited for females. Klein's nodded slightly before he continued reading the information. After he finished reading, he realized that the secret organizations were a lot more than he imagined. But on second thought, he found it very ordinary. After all, this world had so many years of history underlying it. There was once an era when Beyonder powers were extremely active. According to the provided information, Klein categorized the secret organizations into three based on era. First were the ancient organizations born in the Fourth Epoch. They included, but were not limited to, the Moses Ascetic Order, Secret Order, and the Blood Sanctify sect, which were followers of the devil. However, the information only mentioned the Demoness sect. The second was the secret organizations early in the Fifth Epoch, the present epoch. For instance, the Theosophy Order or the death-worshipping Numinous Episcopate. There is also the Life School of Thought, which employs a master-disciple heritage, and the Rose School of Thought, known among Beyonders for its bloody sacrifices. The third category were new organizations that appeared in the recent century or two. They include the Aurora Order, the Iron and Blood Cross Order, the Element Dawn, and the Psychology Alchemists, which Klein learned about much earlier. Apart from them, there were other organizations that did not do anything major. Benson and Melissa must have never imagined that the world is so dangerous. It's not only limited to wars. Klein shook his head with a wry smile. He stacked the classified documents neatly before pushing it to old Neil. Meanwhile, he added silently in his heart, "Please don't let my tarot club be on the list." Old Neil never suspected that a leader of a secret organization was sitting opposite to him. He chuckled and took the documents and headed to Channy's Gate. Klein sat there and wondered if he should divine the location of instigator Triss, but he abandoned the thought after less than 20 seconds. After all, he only had a vague idea of Triss's appearance and did not know if the name was genuine. If he could figure out his location with that, he would not be a seer but a prophet. By the time old Neil returned, Klein had straightened his thought processes and continued his revision of mysticism studies to grasp even more forms of ritualistic magic. He spent the day studying and revising. He did not participate in the joint operation needed for capturing instigator Triss. He did hear that the delivery of sealed artifact 2049 from Backlund had been delayed due to some reason or another. The actual time of arrival was still pending. As he had earned nearly 2 solely from yesterday's divination, Klein spent 10 pence to buy a 2-liter barrel of Enmat beer for Benson on the way home. He also bought some lemon cakes fresh out of the oven for Melissa. "Klein, I know you care for us deeply, but there's no need. There's no need to keep spending money on such matters," said Benson, after he saw the tiny barrel of beer and deliberating over his words. Melissa stood beside him and nodded slightly. "This is probably how our consumerist habits differ," Klein sighed in amusement. "Benson, Melissa, don't worry. This was bought with my additional reimbursement. Yeah, I earn an additional 2 to 4 solely every week. I can't tell them that these are the earnings I got from doing divinations for others, right? He added inwardly. That job of yours is much better than I imagined. Benson was taken aback as he made an objective assessment. That's right. I even learned divination from it. Klein mused silently before turning toward the kitchen. Under the combined efforts of the trio of siblings, a sumptuous dinner was ready for eating. After having their fill, Klein, Benson, and Melissa lay slumped in the living hall. It took them quite a while before they got up to clean up, chat, and study. When Benson and Melissa fall asleep, I'll head above the gray fog to see the effects of the ritual. As Klein revised his history textbooks, he shot a glance at his siblings. West Borough. Iron Cross Street, Lower Street. A three-storied apartment was immersed in darkness. There were no street lamps or any additional light. Suddenly, a figure leaped out of a window from the third floor. It landed gently on the ground like a feather without causing so much as a stir. His body crouched and suddenly vanished as though he had blended into the shadows. All that could be seen was the outline of his body. As he traveled quickly, the figure arrived at the harbor. He headed for a corner devoid of anything except for a pile of goods. He seriously observed for a moment, circling the area twice before leaving the darkness and entering the corner. One could see his round and amiable face. He was instigator Triss, who had single-handedly caused the tragedy of the alfalfa. How does it feel? A mysterious figure wearing a black hooded robe walked out of the shadows. The hoarse voice obviously belonged to a woman. Triss revealed a friendly and satisfied smile. Feels great. It was a scene I dreamed and yearned for. I think I have appropriately completed the mission and have taken the necessary preparations for the advancement. The black-robed woman nodded indiscernibly and said, "Very well. According to the promise, I'll hand you the sequence 7 formula and the 3 main ingredients. You will have to gather the rest by yourself." "No problem," Triss answered, seemingly prepared. The mysterious woman raised her hand and handed a book-like object to Triss. The book had an ancient and mottled bronze exterior cover with a strange star-shaped lock on its side. Triss knew that inside the book was the formula and ingredients. He instantly became thrilled. He tried hard to compose himself as he looked curiously at the potion's name on the bronze outer cover. "Witch!" Triss exclaimed. He found it unbelievable that the word written in ancient Hermes was witch. "Witch. I'll advance to become a witch." What a joke. The mysterious woman covered her mouth and let out a chortle. It took her quite some time before she answered. "Weren't you always curious? Curious about why our upper echelons are all female? That is the answer. Gandalf is a fictional character, a wizard and one of the protagonists in J.R.R. Tolkien's novels The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. 67. Response: the crimson moon high in the sky hung silently in the darkness. It illuminated Tingen City, the city of universities, as it gradually fell silent. Klein stood in front of his desk and looked through his oriel windows to see the empty Daffodil Street. He heard the sound of carriages quickly galloping far away without causing a din. He picked up his vine-leaf-patterned silver pocket watch and snapped it open. He took a glance at it and drew the curtains, making the yellowish lights of the gas lamp reflect back into the bedroom. Klein turned around at an adequate speed, locked his room, and switched off the gas valve. The room was immediately covered in darkness. Only a sliver of red moonlight penetrated the curtains. It gave rise to an atmosphere perfect for many late-night folk tales. Klein took out the silver knife he had applied for. He imagined the spherical light and entered a half-cogitation state. He focused his mind according to his previous practice, allowing his spirituality to spew out from the tip of his blade. Then he allowed their motion to miraculously fuse with his surroundings, sealing off the room. He was doing it to prevent any abnormal stirrings that could wake Benson and Melissa. Following that, Klein put down the knife and walked 4 steps in a counterclockwise manner. Every step was accompanied by the incantation from earth. The unchanging roars and murmurs inundated him. With the same mania and pain inflicted on him, he did his best to control himself and withstood the most grueling and dangerous stage in his half-conscious state. The grayish-white fog was endless. The dark red stars were at varying distances from him. The towering divine palace stood erect like a dead giant. Nothing seemed to have changed. The silence and antiquity that had accumulated over thousands of years swarmed him. "No, there is a change," Klein silently muttered to himself. His gaze locked onto a dark red star near him. That was the star symbolizing justice. The star's deep redness began to pulse. It did so with average amplitude but did not stop. Klein carefully spread out his spirituality towards the deep redness. The moment the two made contact, he felt a hum in his head. He saw a blurry and distorted scene and heard the illusory but stacked voice of prayers. "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your help. I pray for your loving grace. I pray for you to give me a good dream. I pray for you to give me a good dream. I pray for you to give me a good dream." The female voice resounded constantly in an intermittent fashion. Klein's psyche turned more irritable and chaotic. It was akin to listening to someone upstairs pounding on the floor when he had just fallen asleep. He repressed his emotions and used cogitation to calm the urge. He carefully discerned the blurry scene that appeared before him. It was a girl dressed in white robes. She had a head of beautiful golden hair. She was standing before 4 flickering flames, her head lowered as she kept chanting. From the distorted image, Klein barely recognized her to be Miss Justice. At this point, he confirmed that the ritual incantation he had created could precisely point towards the gray fog towards him. This gave him a huge sense of achievement, going from nothing to having something. "I won't praise myself for being awesome." Klein's mood turned for the better. He felt that the pleading voice that echoed in his ears like a buzzing fly was now acceptable. With a thought, he attempted to create a response in his mind, transferring it through the intricate connection to the dark red star. "I'm aware." The gray layer emanated before him. A distorted and blurry figure stood in the deepest depths, the spot where his eyes ought to be swirled with deep redness as his voice resounded repeatedly in the vast and empty world. "I'm aware. I'm aware. I'm aware." Audrey Hall was jolted awake suddenly. She sat up with her blanket wrapped around her as her mind was fully occupied with the scene she saw in her dream. She knew very well that she had dreamed of the fool, the mysterious being that lived above the fog. "Is this a response to my morning prayers?" Audrey, who quickly entered her spectator state, calmed down and analyzed. Although she did not understand why the fool did not respond on the spot and only did so at night, she was still shocked that the ritualistic magic was effective with the few lines of incantation. In the past, she had prayed to the Evernight goddess, but had never received any response. Even if Mr. Fool was not a god, he is likely not far from being one. Audrey slowly inhaled before slowly exhaling. Since he was a powerful existence that she had no means of resisting, she quickly threw aside her worries. She began considering what to do next. "First, I have to completely digest the spectator potion. My acting is still pretty good. Second, I have to seek out the psychology alchemists. Third, I should try to obtain the telepathist potion formula from Mr. Fool or clues regarding the psychology alchemists elsewhere. However, every godlike existence should have a complete sequence pathway that belongs to them. They might not know the formulas of other sequence pathways. A new Beyonder organization like the psychology alchemists might not be able to garner Mr. Fool's attention." With the connection severed, Klein sat at the bronze table's seat of honor in a rather good mood. He was completely covered in gray fog. He leaned back and clenched his fist to cover his mouth. He recalled and analyzed the process. At that moment, he was the only living being in the world of the gray fog. Apart from that, there was absolute silence. It seems I can only pass information over and am unable to use the powers in here. From the looks of it, my idea of manipulation would not work. Klein kept prodding his mouth as he silently made a conclusion. He had originally planned on attempting to bind his body with the world of the gray fog in the same manner if the incantation and ritual proved effective. As such, he could then leverage all the power of this mysterious space. If that happened, he could pray to himself, and through such a manipulative manner, he could go around the limitations, the mysteries, and the danger, allowing him to fully use the gray fog world. For example, he could first conduct a ritual and pray to himself for spells. Following that, he could come above the gray fog and answer his own request and bestow it. From the looks of it, I was being too idealistic. My understanding and control of the gray fog world has not reached that level. Klein shook his head in a self-deprecating manner and planned on leaving. At that moment, he saw the dark red star that represented the hanged man begin to pulse. He heard an ethereal and formless voice spread out. I coincidentally chanced upon the hanged man's ritual. Klein nodded in thought. He sat at the seat of honor of the long bronze table and extended his hand to tap on the star. His spirituality spread as it touched the pulsing deep redness. He heard the hanged man's heavy and repeated prayers along with a blurry scene. The hanged man was draped in a pure black robe in the scene. He stood in front of 4 plumes of fire. The surrounding spirituality had formed a wall, isolating him from any external influence. Klein did not immediately respond. All he did was watch and listen silently. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. I pray for your help. After the hanged man finished his prayer, he waited for a while. Seeing that there was no response, he began dismantling the spirituality wall, extinguished the candles, and tidied up the altar. Finally, he swiped his extended hand as aqueous light spread out, making the altar table look brand new. Water-based spell. The bestowment of the storm. The hanged man is indeed at least a seafarer. Klein nodded slightly. Before the scene vanished, he responded via the method he imagined, transmitting it through the blob of dark redness. Alger Wilson was situated in the Rorstad Archipelago's city of generosity. He had not gone with the sailors to the famous Red Cabaret. Instead, he stayed inside the hotel and sealed the door and windows shut to attempt the ritual the fool had described. After familiarly finishing the prayer, Alger waited patiently for a moment, but did not receive any response. It seems this attempt isn't too successful. Mr. Fool needs to change methods. He was both overjoyed, but also a little disappointed. After everything was done, Alger planned on going downstairs for a bottle of Lansky-proof alcohol that could aid a folk of rage to unleash his powers. Mandated punishers of the Lord of Storms were rather fond of this sort of beverage. Pulling open the door, Alger was about to walk out when his vision blurred. He saw gray fog billow in the corridor and a hazy human figure sitting in the deepest depths of the fog, as if on a high throne. I'm aware. The familiar deep voice reverberated around Alger's ears, causing him to freeze where he stood as his head slightly throbbed in pain. Alger's eyes suddenly turned dark. He looked around but realized that nothing had changed. There was still the same squeaky floorboard, the same aged wall candle stands, and the same unclean corridor. I'm aware. The voice was still resounding by Alger's ears. His expression sank as he hit his chest lightly with his fist, but did not say any words of respect to the Lord of Storms. After a long silence, Alger's expression was restored to normal, but his gaze seemed deeper. Klein did not spend too much time above the gray fog. When all the remnant voices returned to normal, he enveloped himself in his spirituality and plunged into the gray fog, plummeting into the material world. The lights before him flew by rapidly, like the scenes of a movie played back at a speed tens of times faster than normal. After Klein felt faint, he saw curtains that let crimson moonlight through along with the blurry outlines of the desk and bookshelf. He picked up the silver knife again and removed the spirituality wall in the room. Then, a sudden gust of wind opened the door and went through the corridor. He was completely relieved when he saw that there were no stirrings from Benson's or Melissa's room. This luck enhancement ritual is really indispensable for traveling. It's concealed and mystical. Klein silently murmured and closed the door again, walking towards his bed. His mission tomorrow was to head to the underground markets for Beyonder items with Old Neil. 68 Monster at dusk. The setting sun cast long shadows of the carriages and horses. Having informed Benson and Melissa that he was having dinner at the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein headed to the harbor with Old Neil on a public carriage. He was dressed in cheap formal attire, afraid that conflict might break out in such a complicated location if he damaged his tuxedo, which he took painstaking care of. He would probably cry his heart out. When the sunlight appeared to turn fiery, the carriage stopped. Old Neil, in his usual classic black robe and felt black hat with a rounded edge, ignored the gazes of others and walked diagonally to the Evil Dragon bar in ahead of them. Even though the bar was slightly far away and the heavy doors were tightly shut, Klein still heard wave after wave of rapturous shouts. They appeared to be cheering on a hero. When he came close, he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head towards the warehouse opposite to the bar. He saw a stocky man dressed in a uniform standing at a hidden corner on the rooftop. The man carried a huge grayish-white mechanical box and held a thick rifle in his hand. The grayish-white mechanical box was obviously connected to the same colored rifle via piping. "Steam-pressured rifle," Klein muttered in shock. He looked at Old Neil and said, "This bar can actually obtain such weapons." That was a military-controlled item. Although it used extracted phlogiston 1, the size and weight of the steam backpack were still shocking, something only a true warrior of blood and iron could withstand. The rifle had an extremely high muzzle velocity and shocking destructive power too. Matched with a suitable scope, it was nearly equivalent to an inferior sniper rifle. What? Old Neil squinted his eyes as he looked over, having a confused look too. Did something happen here? Something happened. Klein surveyed his surroundings and discovered a few more men holding repeating rifles who were searching for something. What happened? Old Neil approached the bar and asked the brawny man guarding its door outside. The brawny man obviously knew Old Neil and smiled wryly. The bar was nearly destroyed earlier. Apparently a wanted man was here trying to buy materials and was recognized. And this was what resulted from it. Oh Lord, what did he do, and how dangerous was he to receive such treatment? My legs went limp seeing all those firearms, limper than after spending an entire night with Ginger Sonny. He did not know the identity of the wanted man, much less know that the people who came to buy materials had Beyonders mixed in. Wanted man, do you know his name? Old Neil asked in interest. I think it was Triss or something, the brawny man answered uncertainly. Instigator Triss. Klein nodded in enlightenment, having understood what was happening. Triss did not know that Joyce Mayer had cast his suspicion on him. Therefore, he had sauntered right into the market to purchase materials without heed. He was likely recognized by an informant of either the machinery hiveman or the Nighthawks, resulting in an intense clash. Was he caught? Klein tapped his silver-inlaid black cane. Based on the surrounding situation, likely not. The brawny man shook his head slightly and gestured with his chin to the rooftop of the warehouse opposite him. He rushed out before those terrifying guys arrived. Bloody hell, I've never seen a man run faster than he did. You haven't seen the true skills of an assassin, or you might be taken away to some indescribable place for further re-education. Klein thought. Is the market still open? Old Neil changed subjects and asked. It just restored operations, replied the brawny man affirmatively. That's great. Old Neil quickened his pace and extended his right hand, pushing open the heavy door. Klein followed closely in tow and walked in. He nearly fainted at the stuffiness and smell of alcohol that inundated him. In the middle of Evil Dragon Bar was a boxing ring. Two half-naked men were in an intense brawl, and surrounding them were dozens of customers shouting and cheering on the side they supported with no lack of vulgarities. Old Neil ignored them and led Klein around the boxing ring and walked into a billiard room at the back. In the billiard room, there were two people holding cue sticks, having a casual conversation. When they saw Old Neil enter, they instantly fell silent for a few seconds. After confirming the visitor's identity, they moved aside and let Old Neil and Klein pass through the secret door behind them. After passing through a few rooms, the sight before Klein's eyes opened up. He saw a place that was about the size of a lecture hall from his previous life. Some vendors had set up roadside stalls with bottles and cans all over. Passers-by strolled through them, either scrutinizing their goods, chatting, or comparing prices. They have to give 5% of their profits to Swain. He is the boss of Evil Dragon Bar, former captain of a mandated Punisher squad and older than I am. He's someone who wishes to drink himself to his death, Old Neil explained in a garrulous manner. Klein thought and gave an honest evaluation. A rather profitable business. After all, his only expense was providing the venue and protection. If any item catches your fancy but you lack the money, you can borrow from Swain. But of course, he charges a very high interest. Old Neil trailed off as he gnashed his teeth. As expected, it's like running a casino. They would provide usuries. Klein held his walking stick and looked around as he asked curiously, "Mr. Swain is a seafarer. The captain of a mandated Punisher squad was likely a Sequence 7. No, he is only a folk of rage. Tingen is not a coastal city, so the Church of the Goddess is much more powerful than Lord of Storms here." Old Neil scoffed. Actually, Swain had the chance of becoming a seafarer, but was afraid that he would lose control, so he chose to give up. Just as Klein was about to ask if the boss of the bar had any experience of nearly losing control, he suddenly felt a strange phenomenon happen on his left. There appeared to be something hidden there, muttering and recounting. Klein turned his head and saw a pale young man. He was wearing an old linen shirt and blue jeans that the working class normally wore. His eyes looked demoralized with a hint of craziness, and he was constantly mumbling. His spiritual perception is very high, or perhaps distorted. Klein creased his eyebrows and muttered. It was the young man's spiritual perception that triggered his own spiritual perception. Generally speaking, spiritual perception sensing something causes some interaction. It was nearly impossible to conceal it from others, but others referred to spirit mediums who had cast their abilities, as well as powerful figures with similar special traits. A Beyonder like Klein would actually find it hard to detect, only detecting if one's spiritual perception reached a certain heightened level, or an abnormal distortion happened. They made eye contact, and the pale young man with messy black hair walked towards him with an expression looking as though he was half sleepwalking and half insane. He stopped before Klein and stared at him. Suddenly, he guffawed. "Ha, it's the smell of death, death." Before he was done talking, he suddenly screamed tragically. His eyes shut tightly as liquid with the color of blood flowed out. Darn it." The young man covered his eyes and hugged his head. He struggled on the ground and only calmed down after a while. He then lay there panting. During the entire process, not a single customer or stall vendor looked over. Klein pressed down his half-top hat and looked at Old Neil. Klein's mouth was hanging open in shock, using his actions to demonstrate his shock and to request for advice. Don't mind him. He's a demisol, an orphan nicknamed Monster. He was born with high spiritual perception, and he has always been able to see things that he shouldn't, hear voices that he shouldn't. Hence, he is always raving and often getting hurt. Old Neil shook his head as he explained. He could tell that my body was once dead. Klein knitted his eyebrows and lowered his voice as he asked in doubt, haven't the Night Hawks, mandated punishers, or the machinery hivemind ever thought of taking him in? No, we do not have the sequence potion that suits him, said old Neil with a sigh. Right, he was born with the starting point of half a sequence. Klein asked again curiously, what sequence pathway suits him? The sequence 9 that suits him is called Monster. His nickname came from there. It's a pity that only the life school of thought has control over the sequence pathway's beginning, old Neil replied softly. He tried to keep the conversation between him and Klein from the people around them to avoid leaking information to mysticism aficionados. Life school of thought. Klein recalled the information he had previously read. The secret organization appeared in the beginning of the current epoch. Its actual origins were unknown, but it was mainly passed down via master and disciple. Their theories and beliefs were hardly known. Klein only knew that they separated the world into 3 layers: the definite rational world, also known as the absolute truth world, the spirit's world, and the material world. Rumor had it that the secret organization had once produced a soothsayer. Wasn't that a sequence pathway that corresponded to Seer? Confusing, really confusing. Klein shook his head and saw a demisol struggle to get up and then wander off to another corner. He reorganized his thoughts and followed behind old Neil. They walked past one stall after another. There were plants like moonflower, fingered citron, night vanilla, and mineral resources like silver, topaz, ruby, and so on. It's really very well equipped, Klein muttered softly. The mysticism aficionados of all ages and genders around him would be stopping, distinguishing, or talking at times. It gave the area a bustling vibe. Walk around on your own. I am going to settle my bill. Old Neil pointed at one of the 2 rooms at the end. All right. Klein nodded without thought. He strolled with his black cane and came before a stall which sold self-made amulets. He took a careful look at it for a while. Just when Klein prepared to speak with the seller, he suddenly heard someone asking the stall behind him, "Is this powder ground from cow teeth pianol? Cow teeth pianol. Isn't that one of the supplementary ingredients of the spectator potion?" Klein thought, then turned around to look at the inquirer. Justice had repeated the formula for the potion several times, so Klein had been left with a remarkably clear impression of the ingredients. A substance supposed by 18th-century chemists to exist in all combustible bodies and to be released in combustion. 69 Protection Amul Klein looked over and saw the person inquiring about the cow teeth pianol. The man was less than a meter away from him. He was wearing a black suit and a halved top hat of the same color. He had a cane adorned with silver in his hand and a pair of gold-framed spectacles on his face. He had a refined bearing. Yes, do you need it? This can here costs 3 solely. The owner of the stall was wearing a long black robe, one filled mysticism traits. The inquirer, whose sideburns were pale yellow, thought for a moment before saying, "Can it be cheaper? I still need to buy other ingredients too. For example, this bottle of white-edged sunflower petals." The stall owner considered for a few seconds before grudgingly replying, 2 solely and 6 pence. I don't think you can find a price cheaper than that. Klein immediately felt that he was overthinking things after seeing how the bespectacled man was buying ingredients other than the cow teeth pianol. However, he still tapped his glabella twice as an act of caution. He swept the man with his spirit vision. No problems. He looks very healthy. His emotions are all right too. Mister, you need to keep this up. Klein retracted his gaze, turned around, and looked at the stall selling homemade amulets once again. The amulets were placed neatly before him. Some of them were made of pure silver, some with steel, others forged from gold. But only a few of the amulets had a weak aura emanating from them, some crimson, some pale white, some golden. This meant that some of them had weak traces of spirituality and were definitely effective to a certain extent. Klein looked at the amulets carefully and confirmed that the stall owner making the amulets had some foundation in mysticism. The stall owner did not make any mistakes matching the different energy sources to the different incantations. He was also extremely accurate at choosing the materials that corresponded to the different energy sources. Of course, a mere mysticism aficionado would definitely make some mistakes. Klein noticed that the stall owner did not fully understand the incantations. One could not create an incantation simply by translating the content of the prayer into Hermes. The incantations had to follow a certain format that followed unique rules. The other problem was that the stall owner had made mistakes of varying degrees when he was choosing a suitable symbol for the energy sources. That explained why there were only 2 or 3 amulets releasing the faint light out of the dozens that were laid before him. As for how much of an effect the 2 to 3 amulets would have, Klein could only say that it was better than nothing. An amulet that was truly equipped with obvious effects needed the craftsman to release his spirituality from a blade while carving the incantations and symbols. If one wanted even better results, they would have to supplement it with ritualistic magic. And these 2 things were not something an ordinary person could achieve. Klein tapped his glabella twice, then pointed at the upper left corner of the stall with his black cane. How much for these 2? He did not ask about the amulets that had a rudimentary colored aura but half-completed items. Other than external shape, they had not been carved with incantations or symbols. To Klein, there was no reason to purchase the amulets that had weak effects. What he wanted to do was to transform the half-completed amulets into true amulets. I'll make amulets that can protect a person from danger, 1 each for Benson and Melissa. As for my own, I can ask the Nighthawks to supply me with the ingredients. Man, I must have been influenced by old Neil. I don't feel any guilt when doing something like that. Klein's mind wandered as he watched the stall owner pick up the half-completed silver amulets. The first silver amulet was elongated and had a cavity in the middle. Around it were patterns of angel-like feathers. The craftsmanship was intricate and was very beautiful. The other was simple, almost completely devoid of any additional decorations or carvings. It had a vertical line representing the night and a circle representing the crimson moon. Klein, who paid much attention to appearances, took a liking to them immediately. "This is 6 solely," the middle-aged stall owner said, pointing to the intricate amulet. He was a man of few words. After pausing for a while, he rubbed the simpler piece and said, "This is 5 solely 3 pence. That's too expensive. They are still far from being an amulet." Klein had slowly been influenced by Benson and Melissa, so he had begun cultivating the habit of haggling. After a battle of words, he bought the 2 silver accessories at 5 solely 6 pence and 4 solely 9 pence respectively. Yeah, they can only be considered silver accessories for the time being. Klein had that in mind. The 10 solely 3 pence was deducted from the reimbursement he received for his divination club membership. Klein received the 2 silver accessories and placed them into his pocket. He was about to head to another stall when he heard a gentle voice. "Sir, why are you not buying a completed amulet?" Klein turned his head over and found a teenage girl asking him the question. She was about 15 years of age and wore a lacy yellow dress while holding onto a veiled hat with a ribbon. "It's because I intend to make my own amulets. As you know, that is the wish of every aficionado of mysticism." Klein minced his words and answered. He did not wish to make the stall owner think that he was trying to snatch his business, even though he had considered using his skill to earn a quick buck. The teenage girl had naturally curly brown hair, and her face was adorable due to her baby fat. She looked at Klein with her light blue eyes and asked sincerely, "Can I seek your advice on choosing an amulet?" "Well, I was introduced here by a friend. I've been here several times and have a deep interest in mysticism. But I still do not know too much about it, and she, my friend, is going to turn 16 soon. I wish to select an amulet as a gift to her. I didn't bring her along as I want it to be a surprise. I had previously sought her advice, but I cannot remember a lot of the critical points. Klein gave a gentlemanly smile. What kind of protection amulets are you looking for? Something to avert disasters, something to avoid illnesses, something that gives fortune. Different requirements would require different energy sources, which means that they must point to different gods. Different gods would have different corresponding constellations, and the different constellations would mean that different materials have to be used. For example, the incantation for averting disasters would belong to the Empress of Disaster and Horror, who is the Evernight goddess. As mysticism aficionados, we all know that the symbol of the Evernight goddess is the moon. The corresponding metal would thus be pure silver. Therefore, if we hope to avert disasters, it is best that we choose an amulet that is made of pure silver and has the corresponding incantations. We would also have to make sure that the incantations are of the correct language and format. The corresponding symbol of the Empress of Disaster and Horror means the path number, the spell's characteristic, and the relative positions of the symbols, etc., must also be correct. But this is too complicated, and there's no need for me to explain this for you, Klein added inwardly. The girl's eyes sparkled. She asked with a little doubt, can a follower of the goddess wear an amulet belonging to another god? No problem. The gods do not mind such small matters, Klein consoled her. It was not a problem for the person wearing the amulet, but the person creating the amulet had to be careful. If a believer of the Lord of Storms were to craft an amulet of the eternal blazing sun, they would most likely receive something malicious. Of course, these referred to amulets requiring the aid of ritualistic magic. The craftsman need not pay much attention to this otherwise. The teenage girl heaved a sigh of relief. I hope to get her an amulet for good health. Which deity should I choose from? The eternal blazing sun, Mother Earth, or the god of knowledge and wisdom? There should be no problem with the eternal blazing sun and Mother Earth. The former is represented by the sun, while the latter is represented by the brown star. Klein smiled as he said, the material of the sun is gold, while the metal that symbolizes the brown star is lead. I would suggest the sun, but I do not know if you brought enough money along with you. The reason for his suggestion was because he had noticed that among the 3 amulets with a rudimentary spiritual glow, one of them was a health amulet that came under the domain of the sun. Isn't this? Before the teenage girl finished her sentence, she stopped and warily looked at the stall owner, who was waiting silently. She thought for a moment before asking, after I decide on the material, how should I distinguish the incantation and corresponding symbols? Do you know Hermes? Klein asked instead. I just started learning it, the teenage girl replied, a little embarrassed. Then let me choose it for you. Klein pointed at the health amulet made of gold and said, this one has no problems, be it in the incantations or the representing symbol. The teenage girl lifted the edges of her dress and squatted in front of the amulet. She picked up the health amulet with designs of the sun's rays around its edges. She felt as though the amulet was nourishing her, making her feel completely relaxed. Thank you, thank you. She stood up and curtsied in gratitude. Klein laughed and said, I'll leave the rest to you and the stall owner. I have other things to tend to. He looked at the stall owner as he spoke and noticed that the man had a weird look in his eyes, as if deciding if he had to give a cut of the profit to Klein. With a smile, Klein did not bother with the matter anymore. He continued touring the underground market, but he didn't notice any true extraordinary materials. At this point, old Neil had already paid off his debt. He was holding a dark-colored wooden box in his hands. He pointed to the other room behind and said, after he noticed Klein's look of doubt, Go there if you wish to buy or sell extraordinary materials. After all, no one wishes to let others know what extraordinary items they are purchasing. I understand. Klein nodded as though in thought. There was no need for him to go there for the time being. He headed toward the exit of the underground market together with old Neil. How much for these elf flowers? A query suddenly entered Klein's ears. Elf flowers. That's also an ingredient for the spectator potion, Klein thought as he glanced sideways. He once again saw the refined, bespectacled man. What's the matter? Old Neil asked curiously. Nothing much. Klein retracted his gaze. Although he was a quasi-member of the Nighthawks, he did not feel that all Beyonders had to be absorbed by the churches or locked up. He believed that it had to depend on the situation. Spectators definitely posed little danger to society or the kingdom, and the chances of losing control as a Sequence 9 were very slim. After leaving Evil Dragon Bar, Klein and old Neil took a public carriage and left the harbor. They then split ways at the North Borough and headed back to their respective homes. The public transport steered into Daffodil Street and stopped by the side of the road. Klein was about to get off the carriage when he suddenly saw a young lady wearing a grayish-white dress about to board the carriage. This lady had smooth black hair, her face a little round. She had thin eyes and unassuming features, but paired together, she gave off the feeling that she was sweet and gentle. Klein noticed her not because of her beauty, but because he discovered that her body was shuddering slightly. It was an unnatural shudder. "Miss, are you all right?" Klein asked in concern. The young lady shook her head abruptly. "No, I am just too tired." The people behind Klein were urging for him to get off, so Klein could only leave the carriage. When he found his footing, he paid attention to the situation from before again. He pinched his glabella twice, planning to determine if the lady was indeed all right. He had the intention of sending her to the hospital if she had a serious illness that was going to act up soon. Activating his spirit vision, the colors of the auras started to surface. Klein turned around and prepared to look at the sweet and gentle young lady. 72-049. Arrival clip-clop, clip-clop. The horses widened their paces as the wheels began rolling in tow. Despite activating his spirit vision and turning around, hoping to observe the refined and sweet lady, Klein did not have his wishes fulfilled. All his eyes reflected were brown figures moving past him. Meanwhile, the passengers from the stop had already boarded the carriage. The carriage door was closed tightly as it gradually departed. Within the carriage, 20 to 30 people stood closely to each other, their energy fields overlapping and shielding each other. Hence, it was an explosion of colors in Klein's vision, making it difficult for him to differentiate. He shook his head quietly and raised his finger to tap his glabella to deactivate his spirit vision. To him, it was simply help he could provide if he happened to chance upon it. However, if he were to miss it, and the situation was not especially clear, there was no point taking it to heart and delaying his own matters. While bathing in the crimson moonlight, Klein strolled back home on the still bustling Daffodil Street. He returned to see Melissa sitting beside the dining table. She was busy doing her homework under a bright gas lamp. She bit at the fountain pen and frowned, appearing deep in thought. "Where's Benson?" Klein asked casually. Melissa looked up. She blanked out for a few seconds before saying, "He said he went around a few boroughs today and was covered in sweat. He's taking a nice, relaxing bath." "All right." Klein chuckled. Suddenly, he realized that she was wearing a dress he had never seen before. It was entirely beige in color. It had fashionable engageantes. The collar and edges of her top had thin frills. Apart from that, it was a rather simple design, the type one wore as daily casual clothing. It fully accentuated the youth of a 16 or 17-year-old. "New dress?" Klein asked with a smile. It was a purchase that he and Benson had insisted upon. Melissa answered in the affirmative tersely. I just took it back from Mrs. Rochelle. I was thinking that since I had to wash it later, I might as well try it on first. Klein was rather puzzled when he heard that. Mrs. Rochelle, wasn't she our former neighbor? Melissa nodded and explained in all seriousness. Mrs. Rochelle is actually a seamstress, but she was quite unlucky. She had no choice but to sew and mend clothes for others at home. She leads a pretty tough life. I knew that she had pretty good skill, and the price she quoted is cheaper than at a women's clothing store. Furthermore, it's very well tailored to my figure, so I ordered a new skirt from her. It only cost 9 soldi and 5 pence and took only a few days. A dress of a similar style would cost 3/2 of a pound at Harrod's department store. What a frugal girl. Sis, I know that at least half the reason is due to your pity of Mrs. Rochelle. Klein did not reproach Melissa for deciding things for herself. Instead, he said with a smile, "When did you go to Harrod's?" That was at House Street near the Divination Club. It was somewhere where the middle class shopped. Melissa was momentarily at a loss for words. It took her a long while before she said, "It was Selina and Elizabeth. They insisted I accompany them. Actually, well, I actually prefer gears more. I like places with steam and machinery. Yeah. It's quite well nice for a girl to occasionally shop at a department store." Klein laughed as he comforted his sister. After some idle talk, he briskly walked to the second floor, hoping to wash away the repulsive mixed smells from the bar. Just as he was about to return to his bedroom to get a change of clothes, he suddenly heard sounds coming from the bathroom close to the balcony. A few seconds later, Benson stepped out while drying his gradually receding hairline. "How was it? Did you compliment Melissa's new dress?" He shot a glance at Klein and asked with a smile. "I guess I forgot. All I did was ask where it was done," Klein thought for a moment as he said. Benson immediately chortled and shook his head. How unbecoming of an elder brother. When Melissa received the dress, she couldn't bear putting it down. After rushing to cook and wash the dishes, she immediately wore the dress and has refused to take it off ever since. Wasn't she planning on changing after showering? "She can wash and starch the clothes while doing so," Klein subconsciously refuted with the explanation that Melissa had given. "Tusk," Benson sighed. "It's been scorching the past few days. She was busy in the kitchen for a long time, so I believe she would feel much better doing her homework after a shower." "That's right." Klein was suddenly enlightened as he gave his brother a knowing smile. "So that's what kind of person you are, Melissa. There's nothing wrong with a girl caring for her appearance." There's no need to find excuses. The corners of his mouth curved up as he shook his head gently before walking into his bedroom. While he was showering, Klein faintly heard knocking downstairs. He immediately wondered, doesn't the worker who's in charge of collecting coins for the gas meter come only once every 2 weeks? Could it be Mrs. Shaw from next door? That can't be. It's said that this lady strictly abides by the etiquette of middle-class society. She would not visit at an inappropriate time. In his puzzlement, Klein wiped dry his body. Wearing old but comfortable shirt and trousers, he came down the stairs. He surveyed the area but did not notice any strangers. He asked, "Was someone at the door just now?" Benson, who was reading the newspapers casually, said with a smile, "It was Bitch Mountbit, one of the policemen in charge of Iron Cross Street. He asked if we met an 18 or 19-year-old boy who has a rotund face. Heh, he even gave us a sketch to identify. Unfortunately, neither one of us have seen him, or we would have received a reward. What about you?" "Nope." Klein had a general idea what was happening. Instigator Triss had successfully escaped the evil dragon bar at the harbor. He had escaped somewhere close to Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street. Therefore, the police were making visits from door to door. And to go this far made it clear that the operation of nabbing the instigator had completely failed. Klein did not bother himself with the situation. He had yet to begin combat training. He only had basic mastery of shooting, so to consider dealing with a natural assassin was simply using his life as a joke. He did not sleep well that night. He kept worrying that the instigator would infiltrate their house to hide, causing another massacre. Thankfully, Daffodil Street was quiet the entire night, with the morning sun rays dispersing all the fog. The relaxed Klein changed into formal attire, wore his top hat, held his cane, and went all the way to Zoudeland Street. He greeted Rosin at the reception hall. "Good morning, Klein," replied Rosin happily. She suppressed her voice and said, "I heard the huge operation last night failed." "The operation to nab instigator Triss?" Klein asked in curiosity. "Yeah," Rosin nodded heavily. She shot a glance at the partition and said, "Apparently an informant of the mandated punishers discovered the instigator at the harbor. They were planning on waiting for additional Beyonders and another special operations squad from the police to arrive before beginning the operation to do the deed instantly without alarming the commoners. Unfortunately, that instigator was extremely sharp. He charged out of the encirclement when he noticed something amiss, successfully escaping as a result. At such times, they need a Beyonder with tracking abilities such as me." Klein made a joke. "There was no lack of trackers back then." Dunn Smith's voice suddenly sounded. Rosin turned her head abruptly and saw the captain wearing his black trench coat. He was glaring right at her with his deep pair of gray eyes while leaning against the partition's frame. "Find authorized novels in Webnovel Faster Updates. Better experience, please click www.webnovel.com for visiting." She hurriedly raised her hands to cover her mouth. Then she shook her head incessantly, expressing her futile innocence. Dunn turned his gaze to Klein, and after some thought he said, "There were a total of 6 Beyonders from the mandated punishers, the machinery hivemind, and us Nighthawks. We traced the injured Triss to Iron Cross Street's lower street. We found his temporary residence, but the clues ended there. Be it Beyonder methods or ordinary investigations, nothing worked. It was as though he evaporated into thin air, disappearing completely." "Do you need my help with divination?" Klein asked probingly. Dunn shook his head gently. "The machinery hivemind had a mystery prior. He is a senior Beyonder as good as old Neil. I even suspect that he's already at Sequence 8. I'm just unaware what the name of the corresponding potion is." "The Theosophy Order's heritage to this day must have something special about it," consoled Klein. For the rest of the morning he continued his mysticism curriculum, read the historical information and documents, and practiced various techniques just like always. With lunchtime almost approaching, Klein's mind began to wander. Another few minutes later he put away the documents, having heard the summoning of his stomach. At that moment Dunn Smith came into the clerk office. He said in a deep but mild manner, "Klein, follow me to Chaney's Gate. Sealed artifact 2049 has arrived. The subsequent operation might require your sensing of that notebook." "All right," Klein got up and replied. His thoughts became scrambled. He imagined how the sealed artifact would look or if the operation would be dangerous. While in this rather tense silence, he followed Dunn down the stairs and into the tunnel. After going straight at the intersection, Dunn suddenly stopped and turned his head, saying sternly, "Do this action together with me. Keep doing it and absolutely do not stop. Remember, absolutely do not stop. This is for your own safety." While speaking, Dunn bent his arm followed by extending it. He repeated this action without stopping. Klein looked at the captain demonstrate in a befuddled manner. Suddenly enlightened, he asked, "Has this got to do with the uniqueness of the sealed artifact?" "Yes." Dunn nodded with abnormal seriousness. "Repeating such an action will allow us to discover if anything happens to you immediately. Saving you in time will not result in any life-threatening dangers." "Okay." Klein did not hesitate further as he began the repeated action of bending and extending his arm. "If your arm is sore, use the other one," added Dunn. "Sealed artifact 2049 sure is odd. What meaning does this action have? It seems very dangerous. These thoughts flashed past Klein's mind as he looked solemnly at the captain. All right. He had too many questions on his mind, but since Channy's gate was in sight, he had no choice but to bear with it. Besides, with my security clearance, I'll probably not learn of the details. I can only do as I'm ordered. Klein exhaled as he followed Captain Dunn to the keeper room outside Channy's gate.